Hey, and welcome back to the Me First Mindset podcast. I am your host, Dr. Bree, and in this episode, we are talking about how to take all of that information about personal development, all the cognitive models, all the behavioral models, all of the information about neuroscience and neuroplasticity, and really put them into actionable things that you can do in your real life. Because I know that really sometimes we get bogged down by all of this theory, but how do we actually become more self-resourced, and how do we choose ourselves first? And what does that look like? So I'm talking with Lisa today. She's talking to you about her experiences on taking things like AI models and understanding behavior and concepts and putting them into practice for yourself so that you can become more neuroplastic in your life and you can see the results in real time. I can't wait for you to hear this amazing episode. So excited to geek out with you on some of the stuff. Here it comes.
Hi, I'm Lisa Pircher-Reid. I'm an information scientist who wants to make the world a better place for my kids, and sharing my journey is how I do that.
When we entertain the idea or the thought or the possibility of putting ourselves first, it starts to gain momentum in permission for being just me. And that itself changes everything. What would happen if I put myself first? It's a scary question for a lot of people. To start us off, my question for you is, what does that mean for you? What does putting yourself mean for you?
Putting myself first is about no longer shooting myself and making decisions that are aligned to my why and my priorities and what I truly want, not what I grew up believing that I should do, not what I think others expect of me, not what is socially acceptable. And it's making those choices based on, well, how do I feel and what do I want to achieve in my life and what's important to me, and really not caring anymore what other people think about how I do things.
Yeah.
And part of that obviously is the self-care component of taking care of yourself as a baseline. And then part of it is also that learning to practice authenticity and to find yourself in the process of practicing so that you can show up as best as you can today, but always keep showing up intentionally closer to your ideal self over time.
Do you always have that mindset?
Now, yes.
Now yes, but before?
No, so I had an emotional breakdown about 5 years ago. I was 7 or 8 months pregnant with my first, and I was struggling with perfectionism, which I thought was I didn't realize it was a mental health thing at the time. I thought perfectionism was just a trait. And I was burning myself out because I was trying to do everything else perfectly for everyone. And I hit this point where in my career, I felt like I was failing. And personally, I was pausing going, all this stress can't be good for my baby. What am I doing? And it became this over about a year, just completely falling apart as a person, pulling myself apart as a person and looking at it all going, who am I? And do I even like who I've become? And what life am I living? I thought I had all the things that I wanted, but it turned out I had all the things I thought I should have.
Right.
And so it's been this long process of pulling that apart, figuring out who do I really want to be and what do I really want in life. But yeah.
So it took you an emotional breakdown to decide that you needed to make that change. And that was 5 years ago, you said?
Yeah. Yeah, it was, my oldest is almost turning 5. So maybe it was 5 or 6 years ago. But the emotional breakdown wasn't necessarily what made me decide to put me first. It was what highlighted to me that I couldn't handle life with the skills that I had. It was, I mean, and you would know this in depth, I had no idea that I had unhelpful thinking styles. I had no idea that I had such a limited mindset. I had no idea that I didn't know how to communicate in a healthy way. I had no idea that I was passive aggressive. I had no idea all these things about me because on the surface, I was really successful. I had this successful career. I was living in an ideal location. I'd been with my husband for a long time. You know, everything looked like success from the outside.
Yeah.
And I just thought that those anxiety thinking spirals were completely normal because I was working with a lot of people who also spoke to me in a way that kind of reinforced that behavior and reinforced that negative headspace.
Yeah.
And so that the breakdown was really a point of, I can't handle this. And then in that negative limited thought. It was, well, why am I handling it, and what do I really want, and figuring all that out from beyond that question.
Mm. That's so good. And, I like to hear you say that, you had all of these realizations of what it was that was causing these feelings for you. Like all of these things that you had no idea were kind of under the surface there because it's so usual. It's rampant in culture, in the United States. And then also, you're not even in the US. You're having this concurrent experience in a completely different country, which warrants another, let's bookmark that to kind of dig into a little deeper. But how did it feel for you when you first realized that you had all of these underlying things that were causing this expression of life?
That's an interesting way to put it. I felt a little bit like, why didn't I know this stuff?
Mm.
It was a bit of a shock to me. So the reason I ended up really finding out what was going on, I went to the doctor, and just literally to get a certificate to say, hey, you need to reduce your duties at work. And I was going to take it to work. That was my plan when I was in tears and didn't know what else to do. And the GP, he looked at me and he was like, you're suffering from anxiety.
Mm.
Like, you're suffering from stress. And I was like, everybody feels stressed. And he was like, okay, but look at where I work, because of where he was located. He was like, there's a Google building there, there's this bank building there, there's this consulting building there. He was like, literally most of the time I deal with anxiety. He was like, if you're willing to do it, go and see this psychologist.
Mm.
And so he recommended, and when I spoke to her, she knew stuff that I was like, wait a minute. I just told her a bit about me, and then she's like a textbook was telling me the things that I was suffering from. And I was like, how do you know that? I didn't say that. She was like, I can hear it in what you're saying. And now I totally get it. Now I hear that in other people. But at the time, it was like this whole world was uncovered of, wow, how do you know this stuff? And how didn't I know? And what else don't I know?
Yeah.
And how am I going to use that to actually get out of this headspace? Because that headspace, it was awful. Like realizing that I didn't know how to do so many things, and I had no idea how to work on myself. So there was that gap in the middle of, what do I do? How do I get out of this, and how do I become someone I actually like?
How do I become someone that I actually like? Isn't that wild? We're not taught to even be a person that we like. The reason why you didn't know that stuff, I think it's by design. I'm curious to know if you agree with this, but I think that culture by design does not reveal to us those things. The way that we are educated is to become good citizens, to become good students, to become good parents, to become all of these roles. How many little boxes can I fit myself in for everybody else? And that allows me to be productive in society and a good fit for everyone else. But it stops me from being able to be anything for myself. And I think that's by design. Did you come to that realization, or what do you think about that?
Yes, there's a reason I choose to homeschool my kids.
Yes.
Because you hit this point where you're like, oh, the education system is broken. And that's not a dismissal of any individual teacher. I believe that a lot of teachers are really working hard against the system to do the best that they can. But the system is in place. And one thing I talk about a lot on my podcast is normal doesn't mean healthy. Normal means common and expected. So basically, what we're saying is that you should do something because it's been normalized. Well, no, actually, why not pause and question the status quo? And why not look at the schooling system and go, okay, well, if we have such high suicide rates, and if we have such high rates of depression and anxiety, where is it coming from? And I'm not saying that the schooling system is responsible for that. Parenting is very heavily responsible for that, and parenting approaches have changed over time. But continuing to blame individuals, well, if so many people are suffering from it, what are the norms that maybe need to be challenged?
And even in that same system, thinking about the individual as far as the parent goes, like even parenting is socialized. So we can't necessarily even blame specifically parents for having negative parenting behaviors if we're not offering any education on an alternative. We don't have, up until now, the advent of the individuation, the advent of, I guess maybe the resurgence of free thought and the capacity to be completely autonomous while also being in the society. Like, we haven't ever been able to do a win-win like we are now. Like, how can I win for me and contribute to society? How can I maintain my autonomy and also be in my community? And so right now we're building those capacities into our systems like we never had before. And so it makes sense that in the past, our parents were just like our teachers, just like our doctors, regurgitating what they knew to be true based off of all of this information that was not meant to make us well. It was meant to make us normal so that we could so fit into those boxes and be organized as a society.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes down to, evolution itself. So we, as babies, require the support of other people to take care of us. So we have this inbuilt need for community and connection. And then one of the things that really helped me understand, so as a parent now, I'm very, very conscious of the language that I use and the behaviors that I'm modeling, because that creates a baseline for my kids' internal programming. And one of the things that really helped me understand that was I have actually worked professionally in AI and robotics and automation, that sort of thing. And I remember when I learned how AI is trained, you basically take model data and you feed a lot of model data to a computer and you tell it, hey, this is normal, this is what you need to learn. And the way it was described to me, I was like, how is this any different from raising a child?
It's parenting, yeah, for sure.
It's
That's so wild. I'd never thought of it like that.
exactly. And so when I made that connection, I was like, oh, so if you think about it, if you're not conscious about the way you parent, and if you're not conscious about what you expose your children to, you're basically essentially giving AI access to the internet. You are creating a situation where anyone and anything can become a behavioral model for children. And so a lot of the things that we have as norms in our society are not necessarily things that we consciously choose to do to fit in either. They are just things that we have seen have been normalized, and we think, oh, okay, that's how I should behave. That's acceptable behavior in society.
Right.
And so I am a big believer now in conscious language shifts, because if you can speak in a way that removes blame, shame, and guilt, and if you can speak in a way that owns how you feel and stops playing in roles of the triangle of drama and of the four horsemen, and really speak in a way that is healthy for your mindset and healthy for your relationships, you can start to show up in a way that you can be there for you and be meaningfully contributing to society.
Yeah, and that's the glow up. I think that if we could really distill down the purpose for psychology, therapy, whatever, enlightenment, personal development, it's to that endpoint. We're trying to speak our truth with as much neutrality, kindness, and compassion as we can, while also maintaining positive connection with other people. And that is, for some reason, ends up being one of the most difficult things, and the longest life lesson for all of us. Is it's a skill that we're just learning how to teach, and it's a skill that we're just learning ourselves to model.
Yes, and that's a huge thing, right? So this view that traits are inbuilt, I grew up with that view, but now I look at it, understanding neuroplasticity, understanding behavioral modeling, understanding all these things. I look at it and go, oh, almost everything I grew up thinking was a trait is a skill, and you can actively practice it. Patience is a skill, kindness is a skill, empathy is a skill. All of that we grew up thinking, some people are kind and some people aren't, or some people are good and some people are bad. When we label children and when we label ourselves, we create this idea that you are one thing or another. Well, no, we can all strive to be our best selves, and we can all go down that path of becoming someone that we are comfortable with, that is authentic to who we want to be and how we want to show up, that is also valuable to other people.
Yeah. When we confuse those skills or values as inherent traits, that's when we're in the most danger of having shame. So shame is the experience of believing the limiting belief that I am bad. If I'm not fitting in with the standard, if I'm not, able to assimilate, or if someone else is experiencing me as being just inherently bad, the expression is shame. And we feel that shame, and it creates this disconnection, and it also hyper identifies us with that limiting belief. And so I love what you're saying right now about the skills, because what people need to hear when they're listening to this conversation is that it's possible. That whatever
Yeah.
you're dealing with right now, whatever, experience of life that you're having, whatever shame, whatever guilt, whatever negativity, whatever anger, whatever hard, heavy feelings, blockages, anything like that, it's possible to build a skill set to help you work with that, manage and tolerate it, to make it feel more like a win-win for you and for people in your life.
Yes. And one of the big learnings for me in that particular space was self-regulation. I had no idea how to self-regulate. And I didn't realize, one, I didn't understand the nervous system or the brain in any detail at that stage of my life. And I didn't understand that you had the capacity to control it. So from a biological perspective, the ability to slow down your breath, slows down your heart, gets you out of that fight or flight mode. But there's that space there that it creates. That's the space where you begin to practice whatever it is that you're struggling with. So feeling angry and frustrated at something a toddler does, for example, it's not the toddler's fault. That's your level of tolerance of frustration. And the way that you move away from that longer term is to pause and breathe and then choose to practice patience. Because it's not about, well, I'm feeling uncomfortable, or, well, they need to hurry up, or any of that stuff. This whole view of we need to hurry up and we need to do everything fast. It's again, another dysfunctional, normalized behavior. So the more we consciously choose what is it that's causing us stress, and then when we breathe and regulate and pause, choosing in that moment, well, how do I want to show up and how do I want to feel, and practicing behaviors that align with that. And over time, that's how you take advantage of neuroplasticity. The more you practice, the more it becomes a part of who you are, the stronger those neural connections become.
Right. So when you were arriving at these possibilities for yourself in this kind of, experience of having to shake it all down, having to rebuild it, recognizing all of these things that you wanted to change with yourself, did it feel counterculture? Did it feel difficult for you?
Yeah, I cried a lot. It felt really hard. It felt necessary. It felt necessary because I had seen my unknown unknowns and I couldn't deny them, and I didn't want that life anymore, and I didn't want to show up that way anymore. And I had a little newborn in my arms, and so it was very front and center that if I don't sort my stuff out, well, she's going to have to sort her stuff out because I handed it on to her.
Yeah.
And then the very beginning of my journey was hard because I was still in a place of judgment. And so I was noticing the behaviors that I was working on in other people, and I was judging them for it. And it took me a while to get to the point of accepting we're all in our own journey. Some people are ready for change and some people aren't. And it's accepting that the process itself can be really hard. It can be really overwhelming to see your entire life in a different light. Everything you ever thought about yourself, everything you thought about people in your family, everything you thought about your childhood, irrelevant if you thought of it as traumatic or not. There's a lot of stories that you tell yourself that once you understand thoughts, that they are automatic based on your life experiences and your knowledge, they're not true or false necessarily. And they're not always positive. So once you have that view of like, oh, a thought is just this thing that occurs, it's like a prompt that appears in your brain based on everything that you know. If that's unhealthy, like there's a lot of work to unlearn that, and there's a lot to let go in your body physically that you've been holding on to. So the process is hard, and it physically hurts and it emotionally hurts, and it's eye-opening, and you come out of it with this sense of self-awareness and this sense of who am I really and what do I really want? Because that question, like, we don't really ask it of ourselves very often. And it's so important, because who are you? If you don't clearly sit down and articulate that and figure out who you want to be, like, you're kind of just showing up based on rolling with the dice on autopilot.
Yeah, that one little question changes the entire course of your life, whether you're living it for yourself or somebody else. That is the pinnacle moment where you get to decide, do I live this for myself or for someone else? And it's exactly that question that leads us to conversations like this. What was the hardest part for you in those moments where it was really difficult? Like, what were the things that were the most difficult for you?
Realizing that a lot of my relationships weren't what I thought they were. Realizing that the only person that could do the work was me. Realizing that when I started making changes, so I read, I love the quote around, when you start holding boundaries, the people who push against them the most are those who benefited from you not having them.
Yeah.
And so learning to stop people pleasing and learning to say no and learning to hold boundaries and learning to make choices for me and what was right for my family, it was hard to see the impact and the effect that had on my relationships at a time where I wasn't ready to let them go, but I had to become myself.
Yeah. Yeah. What type of things did you have to do? So what was like the action steps that you ended up taking?
I'm writing a whole book series on that.
You're writing a whole book series on that?
Yeah.
Amazing. I'd love to see when it comes out. Ping me back again and let me know when
I
when
will.
you have some traction on that. That's so cool. Good for
I
you.
will. Well, I actually self-published the first 3, and then I've taken the first 2 down to get professionally edited now. But for me, it was a path of like learning consistency and learning how to continue practicing new skills, and it's this cycle of continuous improvement. So self-reflecting and recognizing when you're doing handling something better than you used to, and then coming back to, okay, but how could I handle it in a healthier way, or where is my behavior still not aligned to the way I want to show up, and where are my words not reflective of how I want to, of the voice I want my children to hear in their head. I've forgotten the question now.
Just all of the action items that you had to do. Like what was
The
the
action
work
items.
like?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So learning was a big part of it. So learning the actual pieces that were necessary, learning what unhealthy thinking styles there were, and starting to practice noticing them in myself and then actively challenging them when they came up. Understanding what common unhealthy core beliefs were, and then hearing the way I spoke to myself in times where I was having a hard time, and going back to where is that coming from, and physically changing my nervous system by forcing myself into discomfort, by practicing the things that I needed to practice, like saying no and sitting with the discomfort. And a really, really big one for me was learning to feel my feelings. So it wasn't until I read, I was already well on this journey, and then I read Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart.
Oh,
And I
it's
was
so
like,
good.
oh, it's such a good book. And I was like, oh, yes, because I grew up very, very logical. And I like read this book and I was like, somebody logically explained emotions. This is amazing.
I tend to start, so it's so funny for me and where I'm at right now in my life, I'm attracting people that are very intentional with their words. So you are saying this, other people that I've talked to on camera in the last, in the podcast ends up attracting these people that are so intentional with their words. And so I love this because I love the Bernie Brown Atlas of the Heart, because I was like, oh my gosh, it's specific technical details on the differences and the nuances between the little tiny things that are different. And it was so helpful for me. So I'm glad that it was helpful for you too. And it's like, this is the like-mindedness that really helps us get forward. And then it's a great recommendation for anybody else that's listening. Like if you really are into the details and you want to understand yourself better, it's a super resource.
Yes. And it helps you understand other people and yourself better.
Right.
And then in understanding those emotions and those little nuances better, it's learning, oh, I haven't sat with my emotions in the past. So for me, it was, I grew up analytical and logical and problem solving. So if you had an emotion, there was a way to solve it, right? It was either not relevant, don't cry, that's not a big deal. And then that feeling's just inside you because nobody's given you a safe space to say, hey, it's okay to feel that way. It's just a don't feel that. Okay, what do I do with it then?
Yeah.
And you don't think to ask that question as a kid. So you just learn, okay, if my emotional response isn't appropriate, just hold it in and
Ignore
build the
it.
anxiety. Yeah. And so just like learning to sit with fear and anger and those things, and like just sit with it and let it pass, let it out in a healthy way. And if you let it out and it doesn't feel healthy, then next time you feel that emotion come up, try again. And that I think meditation really helped me. I started a meditation practice at the time as well. Understanding that you can't control the thoughts. You can change them over time by rewiring your brain, but in the moment you can't control, you can't prevent the thought from coming up. You can just choose whether you attach to it or not. And the same was the feeling. whether a thought creates a feeling or a feeling creates a thought. I know there's schools of thought in both of those areas, but you can't control the feeling. All you can control is your reaction and a response to it. So that was a huge thing I had to practice, was just, okay, label the emotion. I am feeling angry. I am feeling sad. And then sometimes asking why and doing the work to process that and unlearn the learned childhood behaviors there. And sometimes it is just, it's okay to feel that way.
Mm-hmm. And I like that, like people do get stuck on like what the predecessor is, it's the feeling or the thought. And really what matters is the awareness. So whenever your awareness comes online, if you become aware of the thought, then you work with the thought. If you become aware of the feeling, then you work with the feeling. It's really about being able to begin the process of awareness wherever it starts for you. So if the awareness trigger is a thought, great. The awareness trigger is a feeling, great. And then what can you do with that? What do you choose from there? So whatever you become aware of first is the automatic. Everything after that is a choice.
Yes. And that, I think, was a hard thing to grasp at the beginning, because it was like, well, no, I thought other people made me angry. Well, no, you felt that way based on your experience and your perspective. Mm-hmm. And that learning of like, your perspective is just that. It's your perspective. It's not mm-hmm. right or wrong. It's not the same as somebody else's. It's actually not the same as anyone else in the entire world. Your perspective is entirely unique based on your full life experience, everything you've been through, everything you've experienced. And that understanding of, I think it helped me drop my ego a bit, because I think I was quite adamant that I was right and other people were wrong for a long time. And then I realized that, I had a lot of cognitive biases, and I had a lot of just inability to understand another person's perspective and to be aware of my own perspective. Mm-hmm. And so I love that you called it an awareness trigger, because it is, right? It's a prompt that says, I'm going to pay attention to this now. I'm going to pay attention when I feel something different in my body. And the second that you commit to that, you start to notice. And I think a big part of it is understanding that it's progress. It's progress over perfection. So at the beginning, you're not going to recognize that you're feeling that way and remember to do a physiological sigh and remember to, have a glass of water and pause and breathe and then respond consciously. No, it's not that simple. But the first time that you choose, okay, I'm going to notice when my hand starts sweating. Mm-hmm. Next time you might notice, you might not, but over time you start to notice more. And then over time, once you notice, you then take control of, what do I do next? Which I think is so powerful to understand, that it's within your control. And the first step is conscious language. It's labeling it and recognizing it, and then deciding, okay, well, so what? What now?
And so many people that start this journey have this experience of it being exhausting. It's like a full-time job at first. It takes all of your brain power, because you're building awareness triggers for everything, and you're challenging every little, and it feels in some ways like nitpicking yourself like apart in lots of different ways. And it can be really anxiety producing. It can in so many ways. When we begin to heal this part of ourselves, we do have way more feelings than we ever had. And it's necessary, when we're looking for the balance in the pendulum. If you have in the past felt nothing or really have closed off your feelings, it might be necessary for you to feel everything. So you might feel hypersensitive, or you might feel like it's too much. It's okay to be too much in the pursuit of balance. And then in the opposite ways is the same. If you are used to just emoting, your path towards neutrality is maybe going to feel really numb, and that's okay too. Just holding space for that being the truth. But the point that I was trying to make is, it is a full-time job at first, and it does get easier once you start to and I'm curious to hear what you think about this too. But once you start to do the work in the front to organize the patterns and create the awareness triggers and to connect the dots, automatic shifts happen, and it becomes a lot more manageable after a certain period of time.
Yes. And for me, as a very logical person, it took me a while to understand that, because I looked at it and was like, okay, I understand the whole comfort model, but that was very theoretical for me. And then when I started learning about the biology and the physiology of what's actually going on in your brain and nervous system, I understood that that discomfort that you feel and that exhaustion that you feel is because autopilot runs relatively easily.
Mm-hmm.
It's like opening a program that already exists. It's running a standard procedure that already exists. It's been written. You're literally just hitting go. But when you choose to behave differently for whatever it is, when you choose to learn any new skill, any new thing, that period of frustration is like friction inside your body. It's actually increased metabolic churn because you are doing something consciously. Instead of just clicking play, you are literally opening up the code and going, now let's try this, let's test this. There's a lot more effort involved in doing it. And the reason technically that it gets easier as you go is because that little neural pathway, you've already created it. You already opened up the program and said, well, let's try something else. And once that exists, every time you use it, it gets easier because the neural connection strengthens. And once those pathways exist, it sort of just becomes who you are if you choose to continue practicing it. And it's easy at the beginning to fall back into old habits if you aren't driven by something bigger. So if you're trying to change because somebody told you you need to change, or if you're trying to change because you think I need to do better, and that's it, that's not enough. You need to be driven by something bigger. You need to understand, what Simon Sinek calls your why, because then you can keep falling back on that. And when the old behaviors or the old thoughts start to come up, you can remind yourself, no, I don't want that anymore. I don't need that because it's not aligned with who I want to be and it's not aligned with what I want to achieve in my life. But you kind of have to sit with that discomfort for a period of time of this is just something new. And every time you learn something new, you're going to suck at it for a while, and then you can have a messy middle period. And then eventually you learn a new skill. And then it's just a matter of working towards mastery at whatever level it is that it's important enough for you to put in that much consistent effort and practice.
And it is, in a way, sort of like a science where we're playing with testing out new skills. And when we come to healing with that expanded capacity, like, just because this didn't work doesn't mean I can't get better. Like, what will work? So we just have the curiosity that allows us to continue looking for the solutions and the fit for the solutions. Maybe it didn't work here, but it can work here. Like, what can I do here? What's available here? Staying in control of your reality means also like holding space for when things don't work and not allowing that to just be the message from there on out. And I think that really helps with neuroplasticity too. And I wanted to come back to what you said about having the right intention for change, because when people choose, oh, I want to be a better version of myself for somebody else, it does at some point still lead you down the road of having intolerable experiences in life, because it's still not going to feel good. And you're going to start creating a mask and a shell and a life based off of somebody else's expectations. That at some point will have to crack open and will be out of resonance with you and who you are. It really has to be chosen from this finally coming to the conclusion or realization that I just deserve to be happy. Like, at the very end, underneath all of this, just at the very least of things, don't I just deserve a pleasant experience occasionally? I deserve the type of peace that comes from being in alignment with who I actually am. I just deserve that.
Yeah, and we all do.
Yes.
We all do. And I think for me, when you say that, I think a lot of people pursue happiness. And when I pursued happiness, I was miserable.
Yeah.
When I pursued healthiness, I became happy.
Mm-hmm.
When I started practicing gratitude, when I started emotionally regulating, when I started processing all of those things, and obviously all the other things you have to do to take care of your body, but when I started really consciously practicing those things, I became happier in general, because I wasn't stuck in those negative thought spirals. I wasn't ruminating over things and mistakes. And I truly embraced that failures and mistakes are just opportunities to learn.
Yes.
I let go of that perfectionist view of like, you have to do it right or not do it at all. Well, no, because if you take that mentality, especially towards your mental health, you're basically saying that you need to be a master before you practice. But
Yeah.
masters only become masters when they practice.
And happiness is a result. It's a result of holding space for whatever comes up for you. So having peace, having happiness is a result of being able to do the work of becoming yourself. Being brave enough to say no, like you said, being brave enough to sit with feelings, being in neutrality with whatever the experience is, happy, sad, whatever. And then once you have, the range and you can be in choice, that's when you have access to the nervous system regulation that allows for the feeling of happiness as a result.
Yes, and the wording that you just used there. So for me, that idea of we practice, you don't have to be brave. I think a lot of people again think that that's an inherent thing. Oh, well, I'm not brave enough. Oh, she's more brave than me. She has more courage.
Yes.
Well, no, she practiced it.
Yes.
Bravery is something you practice when you feel scared. And again, when it
Mhm.
comes to happiness, for me, it's not happiness. Happy is a feeling, just like anger and sadness and all of the things in Atlas of the Heart. It comes and goes, but content and inner peace, those are two very important things that you can't get from just trying to be happy. It comes
Right.
from being in alignment with your authentic self and going, this is what I want. This is how I want
Mhm.
to show up. This is the life I want to live. This is, I am working towards everything that I truly want. And you mentioned around when people are on the path because they're changing for somebody else. A lot of the time, I don't think that works out because you're changing, not because you want to change, but because of somebody else. But if you start down that path and you start actually doing it for yourself, obviously there's big changes that can come. But one piece there is you also have to accept in the process that you will outgrow things and people and places.
Yes.
And that can be a really hard part of the process is you might have invested a lot of yourself and your time and your life towards something you thought you wanted. And then when you learn about yourself, you realize it's not what you want anymore, or actually you didn't want it in the first place, but you thought you were meant to. And giving yourself the space and the grace to accept the things that you've outgrown, that's a hard part too. And it's also necessary.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. So I'm curious to know how your life has changed since you've started to use these tools and practice in this way.
Entirely. I'm an entirely different person. Like, if you had met me 5 years ago, we would not have had this conversation. We would not have got along. I would have been like, yeah, whatever, self-help, great. I have realized that I can create my own reality
Hmm.
by consciously taking action in the present for my future self. And I can find happiness and contentness and inner peace by practicing gratitude for what it is that I have and where I already am at. But in terms of like actual physical changes, I went from living in Sydney in a desirable apartment with this great career and all that sort of stuff and really business focused to we picked up in the middle of COVID when the state borders were closed. We picked up and moved across state. We now live in a regional area. I live in bushland and coastland, and I never have an alarm that wakes me up. And everything I do is because I want a healthier future for my kids. So everything I choose to do for work is not because I want to make money and because I want to climb the corporate ladder because that's what I thought I needed. It's about how do I show up in a way that is healthier for them, both in the way I show up in my time with them and the way I show up for other people in my work.
Hmm.
And consciously choosing in the moment how to show up and how to prioritize my own stuff. And I feel different. Everything feels different. I experience emotions and I accept emotions, and I also accept that I am in control of my life. My life isn't something that just happens to me. It is something that I intentionally create and I intentionally take action towards.
Hmm.
And so it's everything. It's a mindset change. For me, it's a physical relocation and an entire shift in my perspective. In my 20s, I thought I knew everything. And then now in my 30s, I'm like, wow, there is so much I don't know.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like opening that up with, I've learned humility. I think I didn't have that in the past, and it wasn't something that I practiced. And in that process of learning how much you don't know, you kind of learn non-judgment for your past self and for other people who are still in that position.
Absolutely.
And And for me, it created this deep desire to know more, because there is so much more we can learn, and there's so much more that we can do once we are self-actualized and self-aware, and actually taking control of, well, what is this lifetime that I have? What am I going to do with it? And how am I going to be impactful in how I show up and what I do with my life?
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel held back, or I see them being held back from their capacity when they stay at war with who they used to be. When they don't have compassion for, I didn't know better, so I couldn't do better. When you have that kind of compassion, you can let that go. You make space for who you can be going forward without bringing that judgment forward. So I think that's so beautiful to be able to say, like, like I was who I was. And, there's a lot of compassion for the person that was really struggling there, doing the best they could in the ways that they knew how. And now I know better, so I do better. I do differently.
The name of my podcast is Know More, Do Better,
Oh,
from Maya Angelou's quote, because once you know more, you can do better.
yeah.
And even interestingly, on that particular quote and that topic, when I first did my very first episode, I received some feedback from people around the title was triggering, because it was like, oh, you know better. And I was like, no. To be very clear, it's not about being better than anybody else, or thinking you're better than anybody else, or thinking you know more. It's about your individual journey and what do you need to learn to do better for yourself and the life that you want to create. And that non-judgment, and that practicing non-judgment and compassion, you have to do it for yourself and for others, irrelevant of where they're at in their journey.
For
and
sure.
that creates inner peace too, because instead of like battling with people and being in confrontation, it's also feel like, I accept you where you're at. If you want my help, I have resources to help you.
Right.
And if not, that's your journey. It's not mine. So that created a lot of inner peace for me. Like, other people's problems, that's their problems, not mine. I'm not responsible for how other people feel.
Yes. So what would you say is one of the ways that someone can make these choices for themselves? If you had to distill advice down to just like a few sentences, what's your best advice for people that are willing or hoping to go down this journey also?
Oh, figure out your bigger picture. So a big piece for me was reading The Blue Zones by Dan Buettner, and the top 5 regrets of the dying. So if you take a step back from your current life and your current struggles and look at what is your bigger picture, you can really clearly define what your priorities are and what your values are. Not what you think you value, not what you are currently prioritizing and valuing, but what do you inherently value, and then start making choices in the present that are aligned to those things. And if you did just that, if you just sat down and looked at the big picture and defined your core values and your priorities, and you made choices consciously in every moment of the day of what you were doing, what you were saying, what you were thinking, what you were attaching to, aligned to those things, your entire life can change within a few months, a few years.
Thank you so much for being on here, for having these conversations, and like, I love the span that you have, neurobiology and the neuroscience of change and behavior change, and how you're able to really make them into actionable things that move the needle for people. And it's really interesting. I can't wait to see the books that come out, and how can people get a hold of you?
So the podcast is Know More, Do Better on Spotify and Apple. On Instagram, I'm at Pircher-Reid. And the book that is currently available is Beyond Reactions: Nurturing an Emotionally Intelligent and Limitless Generation Through Conscious Parenting. And the one that's in progress is around personal growth and how do you apply several in progress, personal growth and mental health. So yes, if you follow me on Instagram, you can find everything else from there. But yeah, the part that you were talking about, I appreciate you calling it out that way, because for me, as having grown up as such a logical person, one of the things I struggled with the most with self-help and starting the journey was a lot of it was theoretical, and a lot of stuff about emotions was written by people who were inherently emotional and empathic. And so being able to understand these theories in terms of, well, how can I actually apply them, was a huge piece for me. And that was what drove me to writing and to the podcast, because I was like, well, if I understood the theory and could never apply it, I can't be the only one. There's going to be other people who are seeing this and going like, yeah, cool. So what? How do I apply it? How is it relevant to me? How am I going to great, what are these models and how are they actually going to translate into anything in my life if I don't know what that step is between understanding how and why it works, and then how do you actually make the change?
And it's a journey for everybody. We have to just keep trying the things that we are exposed to and adapt them to ourselves. But I'm glad that you have this information out there. I think that, I'm excited to go watch it and read it myself. As I'm on the podcast and working with clients, I'm also on the journey, right? We're all in the
Yes.
middle of the journey, and there's always more to learn and ways that we can challenge ourselves more. And so, thanks so much for being a part of that for my life, for the podcast here, and then for people that are listening.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.